Hillary Clinton walked into the CNN studio, confident, prepared, even smug. She'd been invited to discuss intelligence reform, but she had other plans. She was going to revive her favorite talking point, the one about Tulsi Gabbard being a Russian asset. She'd gotten away with it before, hiding behind spokespeople when Gabbard sued her for $50 million. Tonight, she'd say it again, on national television, and discredit the Director of National Intelligence. What Hillary didn't know: Tulsi Gabbard was done playing defense. The confrontation that followed shocked America. No moderator could stop it. No commercial break could save her. For 90 minutes, Gabbard systematically destroyed Hillary's legacy, from Benghazi to Libya, from the rigged primary to the Clinton Foundation, from deleted emails to uranium deals with Russia. Hillary tried her usual tactics. Deflection, that's been debunked. Changing the subject. Nothing worked. Gabbard had the receipts, the timelines, the evidence. And most importantly, she had something Hillary never expected: the courage to say what everyone had been thinking for years. By the end, Hillary Clinton literally fled the stage in tears, unable to answer, unable to defend herself, unable to escape the truth she'd spent decades hiding. This is the story of that confrontation, and why one decorated combat veteran finally said, "Enough." The CNN studios in Manhattan gleamed under the harsh television lights on the evening of April 10th. In Studio 5A, technicians made final adjustments to cameras, sound equipment, and the iconic backdrop that millions of Americans would recognize instantly. This was prime time, 8:10 p.m. Eastern. The network had promoted tonight's special for a solid week. A conversation on intelligence leadership, reforming America's spy agencies. The format was simple: a town hall discussion moderated by Jake Tapper, CNN's chief Washington correspondent, featuring two guests with decidedly different perspectives on national security. On one side, former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, who had spent decades in the corridors of power and remained one of the Democratic Party's most prominent voices on foreign policy. On the other, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, the former Congresswoman and Army National Guard veteran who had shocked Washington by accepting President Trump's nomination to lead America's intelligence apparatus. The studio audience was already seated, a carefully selected mix of political affiliations, though the CNN crowd naturally skewed progressive. Many wore Clinton 2024 buttons from her brief, unsuccessful primary run. Some held signs questioning Gabbard's loyalty, echoing the talking points that had circulated in liberal media since her appointment. The energy in the room crackled with anticipation. In the green room, Hillary Clinton reviewed her notes one final time. At 78, she remained formidable. Her signature pantsuit immaculate, her hair perfectly styled, her expression that familiar mix of confidence and calculation. Her communications director, Nick Merrill, stood nearby, scrolling through his phone. "The audience is friendly," Merrill said. "Gabbard's approval rating with Democrats is still underwater. This should be straightforward." Clinton nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. She'd been preparing for this moment. Gabbard had been a thorn in her side since 2016, when the then Congresswoman had resigned from the DNC to endorse Bernie Sanders. Then came 2019, when Gabbard had responded to Clinton's Russian asset comments by suing her for $50 million, a lawsuit that had eventually been dropped, but not before generating sympathetic headlines for the Hawaii Democrat. Now Gabbard was DNI, with access to the nation's most closely guarded secrets, and Clinton intended to make Americans question whether that was wise. "She's going to try to seem reasonable," Merrill continued. "Military bearing, aloha modesty, the whole veteran routine, but she's vulnerable. On Syria, on her Trump support, on the Russian propaganda networks that promoted her. I know, Clinton interrupted. I wrote the book on Tulsi Gabbard. Down the hall, in a smaller green room, Tulsi Gabbard sat in a meditation pose, eyes closed, breathing measured. At 45, she radiated a different kind of presence than Clinton. Athletic, composed, with the quiet intensity of someone who'd served in combat zones. She wore a dark blue suit, professional but understated, an American flag pin on her lapel. Her chief of staff, Sarah Reynolds, stood by the door, tablet in hand. "Are you sure about this?" Reynolds asked quietly. "You don't have to engage if she goes negative. You're the DNI. You can stay above it." Gabbard opened her eyes. They were calm, almost serene. "She's been slandering me for 7 years. Tonight, she does it to my face. And tonight, she answers for her record." "They'll have the audience," Reynolds warned. "I have the truth," Gabbard replied simply. At 7:58 p.m., Jake Tapper took his position on the stage between two comfortable armchairs. The red light on camera 1 blinked to life. The director counted down with his fingers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "Good evening, and welcome to a CNN special town hall," Tapper began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone. "Tonight, we're discussing one of the most vital questions facing our nation. How do we reform our intelligence agencies while keeping America safe in an increasingly dangerous world?" He gestured to stage left. To explore these questions, we are joined by former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, who has served at the highest levels of American government and brings decades of foreign policy experience. Polite applause. Clinton walked onto the stage, waving, that practiced smile in place. She took her seat, crossed her legs, looked directly into the camera. Tappers continued, gesturing to stage right. "Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who leads America's 17 intelligence agencies and brings the perspective of a decorated combat veteran and former member of Congress." Scattered applause, noticeably cooler. Gabbard walked on with military bearing, back straight, purposeful stride. No waving. She shook Tapper's hand, nodded to Clinton without offering a handshake, and took her seat. The two women were separated by perhaps 10 feet, and Jake Tapper's moderator chair. But the distance felt like a chasm. "Let's begin with an opening statement from each of you," Tapper said. "Secretary Clinton, you requested to go first." "Thank you, Jake," Clinton began, settling into her element. "I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss something I care deeply about, the safety and security of the American people." She paused, letting the gravity of her words land. "For more than 3 decades, I've worked to protect this country. As First Lady, as Senator, as Secretary of State, and as a presidential candidate. I've stood against threats, both foreign and domestic. I've negotiated with allies and adversaries. I've sat in the Situation Room during times of crisis, and I've learned one fundamental truth. American security depends on American institutions that are above reproach, beyond political influence, and absolutely incapable of being compromised by foreign powers." Her tone shifted, became more pointed, which is why I've been concerned, deeply concerned, about the direction of our intelligence community in recent years. We've seen political appointees elevated over career professionals. We've seen questions raised about loyalties and allegiances. We've seen Russian propaganda networks celebrate certain appointments as victories for Moscow. She didn't look at Gabbard, but everyone knew who she meant. The American people deserve to know that their intelligence leaders are above suspicion, that they've never given anyone reason to doubt their commitment to American interests over any other interests, that they understand the sophisticated ways foreign adversaries try to manipulate our politics, our media, and yes, our government officials. Now she turned slightly toward Gabbard. I've been accused of being paranoid about Russian influence. But after everything we've learned about 2016, about social media manipulation, about the lengths Putin will go to undermine American democracy, I don't think we can be too careful. I don't think we can afford to ignore warning signs. And I don't think we should put people in positions of extraordinary power when serious questions about their judgment and their associations remain unanswered. The progressive audience members nodded approvingly. Several clapped. So let me be direct, Clinton continued, her voice hardening. There have been concerns for years about Russian influence in our government, about individuals who, whether wittingly or unwittingly, advance Russian interests while claiming to serve America, about political figures who seem to parrot Kremlin talking points, who appear regularly on Russian state media, who enjoy unusual support from Russian propaganda networks. She leaned forward slightly. The Russians have been grooming people in American politics for years. Some are unwitting assets, useful idiots, as Lenin called them. Some know exactly what they're doing. The American people deserve to know which category applies to those in positions of power. The implication hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Clinton sat back, satisfied. "Thank you, Secretary Clinton," Tapper said, his discomfort visible. "Director Gabbard, your response." Tulsi Gabbard hadn't moved during Clinton's statement. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, expression neutral. Now she leaned forward slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Thank you, Secretary Clinton," she began, "for finally saying publicly what you've been spreading privately for years." The studio went silent. "You've just committed defamation on national television. Again. But this time with me sitting right here to respond, and respond I will." Clinton's smile flickered. "You called me a Russian asset in 2019, Gabbard continued, her voice still measured. "You know what happened? I sued you for $50 million. And you know what you did? Your lawyers made that lawsuit disappear as fast as they could, because discovery would have been uncomfortable for you, because we would have subpoenaed your communications, your foundation's records, your emails. Oh, wait, you destroyed those, didn't you?" A few gasps from the audience. Tapper started to interject, but Gabbard raised a hand. "But we're not in a courtroom now, Secretary Clinton. We're on live television. And I'm the Director of National Intelligence. I have access to information you can only imagine. I've seen the classified assessments. I've read the intelligence reports. And tonight, I'm going to do something you've spent your entire career avoiding." She paused. "I'm going to tell the truth." The atmosphere in the studio had completely changed. Clinton's confidence was visibly draining. The audience members who had been ready to applaud her were now leaning forward, uncertain. "You've spent the last 7 years hiding behind spokespeople and lawyers," Gabbard continued. "Not tonight. Tonight, you're going to answer questions. Tonight, the American people are going to hear the truth about your record. And tonight, they're going to learn who the real threat to American national security has been all along." "Director Gabbard," Tapper tried, "I think we should—" "No, Jake," Gabbard interrupted, her voice firm but not raised. "Secretary Clinton made an accusation. She questioned my loyalty to my country. I served this country in uniform for over 20 years. I deployed to Iraq. I've worn the uniform in combat zones. I've earned every medal on my chest and every rank on my shoulder. I've bled for this country." She turned to face Clinton directly. And I will not let her lies stand unchallenged. The two women locked eyes. Hillary Clinton had stared down dictators, negotiated with terrorists, and faced congressional committees. But something in Tulsi Gabbard's gaze made her look away first. "So let's do this," Gabbard said, settling back in her chair. "Let's talk about Russia. Let's talk about assets. Let's talk about compromised national security. Let's talk about who's really been serving whose interests." She smiled slightly, not warmly, but with the quiet confidence of a soldier who knows the terrain and has superior firepower. "Your move, Secretary Clinton." Jake Tapper made one more attempt to regain control. "Perhaps we should take questions from our audience." "No," both women said simultaneously. Gabbard leaned forward. "Secretary Clinton opened this door. Let's walk through it. You called me a Russian asset. You said the Russians were grooming me. You implied I was compromised. Those are serious accusations about a sitting member of Congress, and now about the Director of National Intelligence. So let's examine who actually helped Russia." She pulled out a document from a folder her aide had handed her. "Let's start with Uranium-1. Clinton's jaw tightened. "That's been thoroughly debunked." "Has it?" Gabbard interrupted. "Let me read you the facts. In 2010, Russia's state-owned nuclear agency, Rosatom, acquired a company called Uranium-1. This gave Putin's government control of approximately 20% of America's uranium production capacity. This deal required approval from multiple federal agencies, including the State Department. You were Secretary of State." She set down the first page, picked up another. "Now, here's where it gets interesting. Canadian mining financier Frank Justra, who had significant stakes in Uranium-1, donated $31.3 million to the Clinton Foundation. Other investors in Uranium-1 donated a total of $145 million to your family's foundation, and your husband, former President Bill Clinton, received $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow from Renaissance Capital, a bank with ties to the Kremlin that was promoting Uranium-1 stock. Gabbard looked up. "All of this, while your State Department was reviewing whether to approve a deal giving Putin control of American uranium. Would you like to explain that?" "The State Department was one of 9 agencies that approved that deal," Clinton said, her voice defensive now. "It wasn't my decision alone." "But it needed your approval," Gabbard pressed. "Your signature was required, and while that approval was pending, millions flowed into your foundation, and $500,000 went to your husband. You approved a deal giving Vladimir Putin control of American strategic assets, while your family accepted money from people who profited from that deal." She let that sink in. "You call me a Russian asset? You literally gave Russia uranium and got paid for it." "That's not an asset, Secretary Clinton. That's a transaction." The audience was completely silent now. Even Clinton's supporters seemed stunned. "And let's talk about your private email server," Gabbard continued, not giving Clinton time to recover. "You stored classified information, including special access programs, some of the most sensitive intelligence in the United States government, on a private server in your basement. Not a government server with security protocols. Not even a commercial server with professional protection. A server in your house." She leaned back. "As Director of National Intelligence, I can tell you exactly what happens when classified material is stored on unsecured servers. Our adversaries get it. Foreign intelligence services, Russian, Chinese, Iranian, they have entire units dedicated to finding exactly these vulnerabilities. And you gave them the easiest target imaginable." "The FBI investigated and found no evidence of hacking," Clinton said. but her voice lacked conviction. The FBI found no direct evidence. Sahitrintis, Gabbard corrected. That's not the same as no hacking. It means they couldn't prove it happened, because you destroyed the evidence. You deleted 33,000 emails. You wiped the server with BleachBit, a program specifically designed to prevent recovery of data. Your staff destroyed devices with hammers. Gabbard's voice hardened. You didn't do that to protect yoga schedules and wedding plans. You did it because you knew what was in those emails. You did it because you were hiding something. And in the process, you almost certainly exposed classified intelligence to foreign adversaries. Those were personal emails. How do we know? Gabbard interrupted. You deleted them. You alone decided what was personal and what was work-related. You destroyed evidence while under subpoena from Congress. You put your personal convenience, your desire to avoid Freedom of Information Act requests, above national security. She pulled out another document. FBI Director James Comey said you were extremely careless with classified information. That's intelligence community speak for you compromised national security. You exposed sources and methods. You potentially got people killed, but you faced no consequences because you were powerful and connected. Gabbard's voice dropped, became almost conversational. So when you call me a Russian asset, because I met with Assad to understand the Syrian war and try to prevent another catastrophic regime change operation, remember that you sold Putin uranium, exposed our most sensitive intelligence to foreign adversaries, and took millions from Russian-connected donors. She smiled without warmth. The projection is breathtaking. Clinton opened her mouth, closed it, looked to Tapper for help. But the moderator seemed as transfixed as the audience. Gabbard's demeanor shifted. The combative edge softened, replaced by something deeper. The somber gravity of a soldier remembering fallen comrades. September 11th, 2012, she said quietly. Benghazi, Libya. 4 Americans died on your watch, Secretary Clinton. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty. She paused, letting each name resonate. I'd like to talk about them, if that's okay with you. Clinton looked wary, but nodded. Of course. That was a tragedy. It was preventable, Gabbard interrupted, her voice still soft but laced with steel. Ambassador Stevens sent over 600 requests for additional security to the State Department in the months before the attack. 600 requests. He documented the deteriorating security situation. He warned about the rising threat of extremist groups. He begged for help. She pulled out a printed email. 1 month before he died, Ambassador Stevens sent a cable to your department. Let me read it. What we have seen are not random crimes of opportunity, but rather targeted and discriminate attacks. Attacks against foreign interests have begun to include government facilities. He ended with this line. Security is a critical concern. Gabbard looked at Clinton. He worked for you. He was your ambassador. He told you he was in danger. What did you do? The security requests went through channels. They were denied, Gabbard said flatly. Systematically denied. Your department said no, 600 times, while your ambassador in a war zone told you he needed help. She pulled out another document. And here's what's truly remarkable. Ambassador Stevens didn't even have your personal email address. In all those emails released from your private server, not one from Chris Stevens. But Sidney Blumenthal, your political operative with no government role, who'd been banned from government employment by the Obama White House, he had your email, your cell phone, your fax number, your home address. The accusation hung in the air. Your friend had more access to you than your ambassador in a war zone. What does that tell us about your priorities? Sid was providing me with information about Libya. Yes, Gabbard nodded. Unsolicited information from someone with no intelligence background, no security clearance, no official role. But your actual ambassador, the professional diplomat on the ground, who was literally begging for security, couldn't reach you. What does that tell us about your priorities? Clinton's face was flushed now. That's unfair. What's unfair is what happened on September 11th, 2012, Gabbard said, her voice rising slightly. The attack began at 9:42 local time. It lasted 13 hours. 13 hours, Secretary Clinton. Those men fought for 13 hours. Her voice became intense. I know what it's like to be in a war zone. I know what it feels like to be under fire, to hear the rounds impacting, to wonder if reinforcements are coming. Those men, Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty on that rooftop, Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith in that compound, they waited. They fought. They called for help. And no help came. Gabbard leaned forward. Where were you that night? I was managing the response. No, Gabbard interrupted. Where were you physically? Who did you talk to? What orders did you give? Because the testimony we've heard is that no meaningful military assets were deployed. No fighters scrambled. No quick reaction force sent. Those men died waiting for help that never came. She paused, then delivered the next blow. And then you lied about why they died. That's not. Your administration sent Susan Rice on 5 Sunday morning shows to tell America the attack was a spontaneous protest, sparked by a YouTube video, a protest that got out of hand. But you knew that wasn't true. Gabbard pulled out another document. At 11:12 p.m. on September 11th, that's 5:12 p.m. Washington time, just hours after the attack began, you sent an email to your daughter, Chelsea. Let me read it. 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. An Al-Qaeda-like group. You knew it was terrorism. You knew it immediately. She set down the document. But you told the American people it was about a video. You stood in front of the families of the dead at Andrews Air Force Base as their bodies came home, and you lied to them. You told them it was about a video and an internet posting. Gabbard's voice was shaking now, not with anger, but with barely controlled emotion. Charles Woods, Tyrone's father, wrote down what you said to him. We will make sure that the person who made that film is arrested and prosecuted. You looked at the father of a fallen American hero and lied to his face about why his son died. You chose political expediency over truth. You chose protecting your State Department's reputation over honoring their sacrifice. Clinton tried to respond. The situation was evolving. The intelligence was unclear. No, Gabbard cut her off. You knew. Your own email proves you knew. You told your family the truth, and you told America a lie. And when you were finally called before Congress to explain yourself, when Senator Ron Johnson asked you about the false narrative your administration had spread, you know what you said? She played a video clip on the monitors throughout the studio. Clinton's voice filled the room. What difference, at this point, does it make? The clip stopped. The silence was absolute. What difference does it make? Gabbard repeated quietly. 4 dead Americans, Secretary Clinton. That's what difference it makes. Ambassador Stevens, who sent you 600 requests for help that you ignored. Sean Smith, who left behind a wife and 2 children. Tyrone Woods, whose father you lied to at his son's funeral. Glenn Doherty, who ran toward danger to try to save his friends. Her voice broke slightly. They had families. They had children who grew up without fathers. They had parents who buried their sons. And you asked, what difference does it make whether they died because of a protest or a terrorist attack? Gabbard wiped her eyes, composed herself. It makes a difference because you lied to cover up your failure. It makes a difference because you were more concerned with your political future. You were already eyeing a presidential run than with their sacrifice. It makes a difference because they're dead. And you're here, asking people to trust you with power again. Several people in the audience were crying. Even some of Clinton's supporters looked shaken. Jake Tapper finally found his voice. Perhaps we should take a break. No, Gabbard said. We're not done, not even close. Gabbard didn't pause to let Clinton recover. She pressed forward, momentum building. Let's talk about why Ambassador Stevens was in Libya in the first place. Let's talk about your war, Secretary Clinton. It wasn't my war. It absolutely was your war, Gabbard said firmly. President Obama was hesitant about intervention in Libya. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates opposed it. But you pushed for it. You lobbied for it. You convinced the president to launch a regime change operation against Muammar Gaddafi. This was your signature foreign policy achievement, wasn't it? Clinton straightened slightly. We prevented a massacre in Benghazi. Did you? Gabbard challenged. Or did you create one? Let me show you something. She nodded to the control room. Another video clip played. This one from a CBS News interview. Hillary Clinton hearing the news that Gaddafi had been killed, laughing. We came. We saw. He died. The clip stopped. The sound of Clinton's laughter echoed in the silent studio. You laughed, Gabbard said, her voice filled with disgust. The death of a foreign leader, however brutal he was. And you laughed, like it was a joke, like it was a game, like it was a personal victory. She stood up, unable to sit still any longer. Do you understand what you did to Libya? Do you have any concept of the catastrophe you created? Clinton tried to respond, but Gabbard overrode her. Before your intervention, Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa. Gaddafi was a dictator. Yes, a brutal one. But Libya had functioning infrastructure, education, healthcare. It was stable. After your intervention, after you came, you saw, and he died, do you know what happened? She counted on her fingers. Libya descended into complete chaos. Competing militias, battling for control. ISIS established a major foothold. The same ISIS you later claimed we needed to fight in Syria. The country became a failed state. And perhaps most horrifically, open-air slave markets returned to Libya. Actual slave markets, Secretary Clinton, where human beings are bought and sold, because the state you destroyed no longer exists to prevent it. Gabbard was pacing now, the energy building. And the refugee crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Libyans fled the chaos you created. They got in boats, overcrowded, unseaworthy boats, and tried to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. Thousands drowned, the bodies of children washed up on beaches, while you gave speeches about your foreign policy experience. She turned to face Clinton directly. The European refugee crisis that nearly tore the EU apart, that fueled the rise of right-wing nationalist movements, that destabilized European politics for years. You created that. Your war, your chaos, your refugee crisis. The intervention had international support. From who? Gabbard challenged. Britain and France, who wanted access to Libyan oil. You used NATO as cover for a regime change operation. And when it succeeded, you abandoned Libya. No reconstruction, no stabilization force, no plan for what came next. Just, we came, we saw, he died, and then you walked away. She grabbed her folder, pulled out more documents. And you learned nothing, nothing, because immediately you wanted to do the same thing in Syria. You pushed for arming rebels you called moderates, many of whom later joined ISIS or Al-Qaeda affiliates. You advocated for a no-fly zone that would have risked direct confrontation with Russia. You wanted to overthrow Assad without any plan for what would replace him, exactly like Libya. Gabbard's voice was passionate now. I went to Syria in 2017. I went on a fact-finding mission because I wanted to understand what was actually happening, not what CNN or the CIA was telling us. I met with civilians, with religious leaders, with refugees. I saw the devastation firsthand, and I came back convinced that another regime change operation would be catastrophic. She pointed at Clinton. And you called me a Russian asset for that. You called me compromised because I opposed your war, because I learned from your failures, because I put the lives of Syrian civilians and American soldiers above your desire for another regime change victory. Assad is a brutal dictator. Yes, Gabbard agreed immediately. He is, absolutely. But you know what's worse than Assad in power? The complete collapse of Syria into the same chaos as Libya, the expansion of ISIS, the deaths of millions, the refugee crisis on an even larger scale. I opposed your war, not because I love Assad, but because I love peace more than you love war. She let that land, then continued. You're called a warmonger, not because people disagree with you on policy. You are called a warmonger because you consistently advocate for military intervention, consistently ignore the humanitarian costs, consistently fail to plan for the aftermath, and consistently leave chaos in your wake. Gabbard counted on her fingers again. Afghanistan, you supported that war. Iraq, you voted for that war and defended it for years. Libya, your war. Syria, you wanted that war. You've never met a military intervention you didn't support. You've never seen the true cost, because you've never put on a uniform. You've never had to write letters to the families of the dead. You've never had to look into the eyes of a child who lost their father because of your decisions. Her voice dropped low, became almost intimate. I've written those letters. I've been to those funerals. I've seen what war actually costs, not from a situation room in Washington, but from the ground in Iraq. And that's why I oppose your endless wars, not because I'm weak, not because I'm compromised, but because I understand what war actually means. She sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Every intervention you've championed has failed, Secretary Clinton. Every single one. Libya is a failed state. Syria is devastated. Iraq is still struggling with the consequences of a war you supported. And through it all, you've never admitted error, never taken responsibility, never learned. Gabbard looked at Clinton with something approaching pity. You questioned my judgment? Your judgment has gotten hundreds of thousands of people killed. Your judgment created refugee crises, empowered terrorists, and destabilized entire regions. And you have the audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity, to question mine. Hillary Clinton sat frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. She looked like she wanted to disappear, but Tulsi Gabbard wasn't finished. Let's talk about 2016, Gabbard said, her voice returning to that measured, controlled tone. You mentioned my endorsement of Bernie Sanders. You suggested it showed poor judgment or disloyalty. Let's discuss what actually happened. Clinton tried to wave it off. That's ancient history. Is it? Gabbard asked. because you've held a grudge for 9 years. You've spent years punishing me for that endorsement. So let's talk about why I made it." She leaned forward. "I was vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. I had a front-row seat to how the 2016 primary was conducted, and what I saw disgusted me. The primary was fair." "No," Gabbard interrupted flatly. "It wasn't, and you know it. WikiLeaks published 20,000 DNC emails showing systematic coordination to undermine Bernie Sanders. DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to resign over it. Donna Brazil, who replaced her, later wrote a book confirming that your campaign had financial control over the DNC before the primaries even began." She pulled out her phone, read from it. "Donna Brazil, I had promised Bernie when I took the helm of the Democratic National Committee after the convention that I would get to the bottom of whether Hillary Clinton's team had rigged the nomination process. By September 7th, the day I called Bernie, I had found my proof, and it broke my heart." "That's your own party chair saying you rigged the primary." Clinton's face was red. "That's been taken out of context." "Has it?" Gabbard challenged. "Your campaign signed a joint fundraising agreement with the DNC in August 2015, before the first primary debate. That agreement gave your campaign control over party finances, strategy, and even hiring decisions. You controlled the DNC while pretending to compete in a fair primary. That's not out of context. That's corruption." She set down her phone. "The debate schedule was designed to favor you. Minimal debates, scheduled at times for minimum viewership. Superdelegates were announced for you before a single vote was cast, creating the illusion of inevitability. DNC staffers coordinated with your campaign to push negative stories about Sanders. And when journalists from Politico sent articles to your campaign for approval before publishing them, your team edited them. You didn't just rig the primary, you corrupted the media covering it. Millions more people voted for me. After a rigged process," Gabbard's voice rose, "after you used every institutional advantage, every media connection, every financial lever to weight the scales. And even then, Bernie Sanders won 23 primaries and caucuses. Millions of Democrats voted for him, despite your efforts to suppress his campaign." She stood again, the energy returning. "I resigned from the DNC to endorse Bernie, because I couldn't be part of that corruption. I walked away from a leadership position, from access, from power, because it was the right thing to do, because Democratic voters deserved a fair primary, because the principles of democracy matter more than party loyalty." Gabbard's voice filled with passion. "And you never forgave me for that. Not because I was wrong. Everything I said has been proven true. But because I embarrassed you in 2016. Because I exposed your corruption. Because I stood with Bernie when you were rigging the primary against him. I went on to win the nomination. And then you lost the general election," Gabbard said coldly. "The most qualified candidate in history lost to Donald Trump, a reality TV star with no political experience. You lost Wisconsin, a state you didn't even bother to visit in the general election. You lost Michigan. You lost Pennsylvania, states Democrats had won for decades. You lost." She leaned in. "And rather than take responsibility, you blamed everyone else. You blamed Comey. You blamed Russia. You blamed Bernie. You blamed Bernie Bros. You blamed sexism. You blamed the media. You wrote an entire book called What Happened, and somehow never concluded that you happened." Gabbard's voice dripped with contempt. "You were a terrible candidate running a terrible campaign. You couldn't fill high school gymnasiums while Trump packed arenas with 20,000 people. You gave scripted speeches while he connected with voters. You called half the country deplorables and then wondered why they didn't vote for you. She counted on her fingers again, her signature move. You ignored the white working-class voters who had been the Democratic base for generations. You represented the establishment when the country wanted change. You embodied the corruption and entitlement that voters despised. And you lost to someone who, whatever his flaws, at least seemed authentic. That's a gross oversimplification. Is it? Gabbard challenged. Bernie Sanders was beating Trump in head-to-head polls throughout 2016 by significant margins. But you rigged the primary to stop him. You put your personal ambition above the party's chances of winning. And when you lost, when your entitled march to the presidency failed, you spent years blaming everyone but yourself. She sat back down. So yes, I endorsed Bernie Sanders. I resigned from the DNC to do it. I stood for fair primaries and democratic principles. And you've spent 9 years punishing me for it. You've used your media connections to smear me. You've pressured Democratic leaders to exclude me. You've called me a traitor, a Russian asset, an Assad apologist. Gabbard's voice became quiet, almost sad. All because I wouldn't bow down to you. All because I chose integrity over loyalty to you. All because, in your world, loyalty to Hillary Clinton matters more than loyalty to democratic principles. She looked at Clinton with something approaching pity. I don't regret my choice, Secretary Clinton, not for 1 second. Because I can sleep at night knowing I stood for what was right. Can you? The question hung in the air. Hillary Clinton had no answer. Tulsi Gabbard glanced at her watch. They'd been at this for almost 45 minutes. The studio audience was transfixed. Jake Tapper had given up trying to moderate. This was now simply 2 women, face to face, settling years of grievances. One more thing, Gabbard said. Let's talk about your foundation, the charitable organization that somehow made you and your husband extraordinarily wealthy. Clinton's eyes widened. The Clinton Foundation has helped millions. Has it? Gabbard interrupted. Let's examine that claim. The Clinton Foundation received hundreds of millions of dollars in donations, much of it from foreign governments and foreign nationals, while you were Secretary of State. Saudi Arabia gave between $10 and $25 million. Qatar gave between $1 and $5 million. The governments of Kuwait, Oman, and the UAE all gave substantial sums. She pulled out yet another document. This is a map showing Clinton Foundation donations from foreign governments, overlaid with countries that had business before the State Department during your tenure. The correlation is remarkable, almost like they were buying access to you. The Foundation had strict ethics agreements that you violated, Gabbard said flatly. The Foundation agreed to disclose all donations and to seek State Department approval for new foreign donations. You didn't do either, consistently. The Foundation admitted it had to refile 5 years of tax returns because it had made mistakes in reporting millions in donations. Those aren't mistakes. That's hiding money. She leaned forward. And let's talk about Haiti. In 2010, an earthquake devastated Haiti. Billions in aid flowed to the country. Your State Department directed much of that aid. Your foundation was heavily involved in reconstruction efforts. And do you know what happened? Gabbard's voice filled with anger. Haiti remained devastated. The majority of the aid never reached Haitians. Your foundation directed contracts to donors and friends. Your brother, Tony Rodham, got a sweetheart deal to mine gold in Haiti, one of only 2 such permits issued in 50 years. The Haitian people called it exploitation. They protested outside your foundation's offices with signs saying, "Where did the money go?" That's a distortion. Is it? Gabbard challenged. The Red Cross raised $500 million for Haiti and admitted it built only 6 houses. Your foundation's relief efforts were similarly ineffective. But the Clinton Foundation grew. Your donors made money. Your friends got contracts. The only people who didn't benefit were the Haitians. She pulled out her phone again, found what she was looking for. Here's what Haitian activist Ezili Danto said. The Clintons have used Haiti and its earthquake victims to benefit the Clinton Foundation and its cronies. Charity fraud is very lucrative. The Clinton Foundation has been caught on numerous occasions misreporting donations from foreign governments and not disclosing the foreign donations as legally required. Gabbard set down her phone. You used the suffering of the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere as a profit center. You let your friends and donors exploit an earthquake that killed over 200,000 people. And you call that charity? She wasn't done. And let's discuss the pattern. Donations to the Clinton Foundation skyrocketed while you were Secretary of State. Foreign governments that had never given before suddenly discovered their charitable impulses. Corporations with business before the State Department found reasons to donate. Wealthy foreigners seeking favors wrote checks. There's no evidence of quid pro quo. Except there is, Gabbard said. The Associated Press analyzed your calendar and found that more than half of the private individuals you met with as Secretary of State were Clinton Foundation donors. You gave access to donors. You gave special treatment to donor countries. When Colombia had concerns about a free trade agreement, they donated to your foundation. When Algeria wanted an exemption from ethics rules, they donated. When Bangladesh wanted help with World Bank criticism, they donated. She spread her hands, spread her knees. That's not charity. That's bribery. You sold access to the State Department. You turned American foreign policy into a profit center for your family's foundation. Gabbard leaned back. And here's the most damning evidence. After you lost in 2016, after you had no more power to sell, the donations dried up. Countries that had given millions suddenly stopped giving. Wealthy foreigners who'd been so charitable lost interest. Even your friends stopped donating. She smiled without warmth. Why do you think that is, Secretary Clinton? Why did all those charitable donors lose interest the moment you lost power? Could it be because they weren't actually interested in charity? Because they were buying access, and you had no more access to sell? The foundation has helped millions and made you wealthy. You and Bill entered the White House dead broke. Your words. Now, you're worth over $120 million through speeches, through books, through the foundation. You profited from public service. You sold access to the highest bidder. You exploited disasters for personal gain. She stood one final time. And you dare call yourself a public servant? You're not a public servant. You're a grifter. You're someone who saw government service as a business opportunity, who viewed the State Department as a path to wealth, who used a charitable foundation as a money laundering operation for influence peddling. Gabbard's voice rose to fill the studio. That's your legacy, Secretary Clinton. Not breaking glass ceilings, not inspiring women, not public service. Your legacy is corruption, war failure, and greed. And the only reason you got away with it for so long is because you're powerful and protected. She pointed directly at Clinton. But not tonight. Tonight, the American people see the truth. Tonight, your record speaks for itself. Tonight, you answer for what you've done. Hillary Clinton looked like she'd been physically struck. Her carefully maintained composure had completely shattered. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet. she began, but no words came. The studio was completely silent. Tulsi Gabbard walked to the center of the stage, positioning herself between Hillary Clinton and the cameras. She stood at attention, not military attention, but close. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of accumulated evidence and moral authority. "Secretary Clinton," she began, "for 7 years, you've slandered me. You've questioned my loyalty to the country I've served in uniform since I was 21 years old. You've called me a Russian asset, a traitor, an Assad apologist. You've used your media connections to smear me. You've pressured Democratic leaders to exclude me. You've done everything in your considerable power to destroy my reputation." She paused. "And I want to thank you for that." Clinton looked up, confused. "Because tonight," Gabbard continued, "you gave me this platform. You gave me this opportunity. You thought you could come here, make your accusations on live television, and I would have no response. You thought you could hide behind your usual tactics, deflection, obfuscation. That's been debunked. That's out of context. You thought you could avoid accountability. One more time." Her voice hardened. "You were wrong." Gabbard began to pace, building her final case. "Tonight, America has seen the truth. Not the truth, according to CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. Not the truth filtered through your spokespeople and your lawyers and your media allies. The actual truth. Your actual record." She started counting, and the audience recognized the gesture by now. "You sold uranium to Russia, while your foundation received millions from people who profited from that deal. You stored America's most sensitive classified intelligence on a private server in your basement, potentially exposing it to every foreign adversary. You deleted 33,000 emails under subpoena and destroyed evidence with hammers and bleaching software. And you ignored 600 requests for security from Ambassador Chris Stevens, and he died begging for help. You lied to the families of the Benghazi victims while they stood next to their sons' coffins. You asked, what difference does it make about 4 dead Americans? You laughed, actually laughed, about Muammar Gaddafi's death, while Libya descended into chaos. You created the refugee crisis that nearly destroyed Europe. You rigged the 2016 primary against Bernie Sanders and corrupted the DNC. You ran the worst presidential campaign in modern history and lost to Donald Trump. You blamed everyone but yourself for that loss. You used your foundation as a pay-to-play slush fund for influence peddling. You exploited Haiti's earthquake for personal profit. And when your power was gone, all those charitable donations mysteriously dried up. Gabbard stopped pacing, turned to face Clinton directly. That's not a resume, Secretary Clinton. That's a rap sheet. That's not public service. That's a crime spree that you got away with because you're powerful and protected. Her voice dropped, became almost conversational. You call me a Russian asset? I served in Iraq. I deployed to a war zone. I've worn the uniform for over 2 decades. I've earned my rank and my medals. I've sacrificed for this country. She spread her hands. What have you sacrificed? You've accumulated power. You've accumulated wealth. You've left a trail of bodies, Benghazi, Libya, Syria, and called it foreign policy. You've corrupted every institution you've touched, the State Department, the DNC, even the FBI. You got them to change their recommendation from gross negligence, which is a crime, to extremely careless, which isn't. Gabbard's voice filled with passion. You're not a public servant. You're a power broker. You're not a diplomat. You're a warmonger. You're not a feminist icon. You're a woman who enabled your husband's abuse of other women for political gain. You're not a victim of Russian propaganda. You're a failure who blames everyone else. She pointed at Clinton. You're not fit to question anyone's patriotism. You're not fit to judge anyone's loyalty. You're not fit to hold any position of public trust because you've proven over and over and over again that you will do anything, lie, cheat, steal, destroy evidence, exploit disasters, start wars, to advance your own power and your own wealth. Gabbard's voice became quiet but intense. And the most tragic thing? You almost got away with it. You almost became president. Imagine that. Imagine what you would have done with that power. Imagine what wars you would have started, what countries you would have destroyed, what corruption you would have engaged in, all while being untouchable. She shook her head. The American people dodged a bullet when you lost. And you're so consumed by entitlement and ambition that you still don't understand why they rejected you. Tulsi Gabbard walked back to her chair but didn't sit. She stood behind it, hands resting on the back. I'm the Director of National Intelligence, Secretary Clinton. I've seen the classified assessments. I've read the intelligence reports. I know what real threats look like. I know what compromised officials look like. I know what corruption looks like. She leaned forward slightly. And I'm looking at it right now. The studio erupted. Some people were applauding, even some who'd come as Clinton supporters. Others were shouting. Jake Tapper was trying to restore order, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Hillary Clinton sat frozen in her chair. Her face was pale. Her hands gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles were white. Tears were streaming down her face. Whether from anger or humiliation or grief, it was impossible to tell. She tried to stand, stumbled slightly. Her aide rushed onto the stage to help her. Clinton waved her off, straightened, and tried to compose herself. This is outrageous, she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the noise. This is a political hit job. No, Gabbard said calmly. This is accountability. This is what happens when you can't hide behind lawyers and spokespeople. This is what happens when someone finally has the courage to tell you the truth to your face. Clinton's communications director, Nick Merrill, appeared on stage, trying to lead Clinton away. We're done here, he said into a hot microphone. This is a disgrace. What's a disgrace? Gabbard said, her voice cutting through the chaos, is that it took this long, that she got away with it for decades, that she almost became president. That's what's disgraceful. Clinton was being led toward the exit. She turned back, tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The cameras captured her face, a mixture of rage and humiliation and defeat, unlike anything America had ever seen from her. As she reached the door, Tulsi Gabbard called out one last time. Secretary Clinton. Hillary stopped, turned. You should have taken the settlement, Gabbard said quietly. On the lawsuit. You should have settled, apologized, and moved on. But you couldn't help yourself. You had to keep going. You had to destroy me. And look where that got you. Clinton stared at her for a moment, then turned and left. The studio was in complete chaos now. Audience members were on their feet, some cheering, some crying, some arguing with each other. Jake Tapper had given up trying to moderate and was just staring at the empty chair where Clinton had been sitting. Tulsi Gabbard remained standing, breathing hard, the adrenaline of confrontation slowly fading. A producer approached her, handed her a bottle of water. She drank half of it in one go. Director Gabbard, the producer said, We'd like to continue. Maybe take some audience questions. No, Gabbard said simply. That was what needed to happen. There's nothing more to say. She walked off the stage, leaving Jake Tapper alone with an empty set and an audience in turmoil. The clip went viral within minutes. By midnight, it had 20 million views on YouTube. By morning, 50 million. By the end of the week, it would be the most watched political moment in internet history, surpassing even presidential debates. The cable news networks played it on loop. Fox News ran with the headline, "Tulsi destroys Hillary." CNN, embarrassed by what had happened on their own network, tried to add context and fact checks, but the raw footage spoke for itself. MSNBC initially tried to defend Clinton, but the backlash was so severe they had to backtrack. The New York Times ran a fact check. Gabbard's claims about Clinton, mostly true, some context needed. Even the Times couldn't deny the basic accuracy of the accusations. The Washington Post's editorial board published a piece titled, "The Reckoning Hillary Clinton Should Have Faced Years Ago." On social media, the response was overwhelming. Gabbard destroys. Hillary trended for 3 straight days. Benghazi. Answers brought renewed attention to the attack. Hart Clinton Foundation became a top trend as people researched the allegations. Politicians from both parties weighed in. Republicans naturally celebrated, but the more significant response came from Democrats. Senator Bernie Sanders, when asked about it, said simply, "Tulsi spoke hard truths that needed to be spoken." Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "We need to be honest about our failures if we want to rebuild trust with voters." Even Nancy Pelosi, when cornered by reporters, said, "The director made some valid points about the need for accountability in public service." Hillary Clinton went into seclusion. Her spokesperson released a statement calling the confrontation a disgraceful ambush that distorted the truth. But it gained no traction. Too many people had watched the full, unedited footage. They'd seen Clinton fail to answer questions, deflect accusations, and ultimately flee the stage. 3 days after the confrontation, the Justice Department announced it was reopening the investigation into the Clinton Foundation in light of new information and renewed public interest. The statement read, "We believe a fresh examination is warranted." A week later, a bipartisan group of senators announced a new Benghazi investigation. This one focused specifically on the security requests that had been denied and the false narrative that had been spread after the attack. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the Democratic Party itself. The confrontation had been so public, so devastating, and so well documented that it forced a reckoning. The Clinton era of Democratic politics, the triangulation, the corporate money, the interventionist foreign policy, the culture of corruption, was finally, definitively over. In her office, at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard sat at her desk, reviewing intelligence briefings. Her chief of staff entered quietly. "You've been invited to speak at the National Press Club," Reynolds said. "They want you to discuss the confrontation. Expand on your comments." "Decline," Gabbard said without looking up from her briefing book. "Director, this is a huge opportunity." "I said what needed to be said," Gabbard interrupted, looking up. "I don't need to say it again. The video speaks for itself. Let it do the work." Reynolds nodded, made a note. "The president called. He wants to congratulate you." Gabbard smiled slightly. "Of course he does." "Do you regret it?" Reynolds asked. "It was pretty brutal." Gabbard set down her briefing book, thought about the question. "No," she said finally. "For 7 years, she called me a traitor. She questioned my loyalty to my country. She tried to destroy my career, and she did it while hiding her own corruption, her own failures, her own compromised relationship with foreign powers. She stood, walked to the window overlooking the Potomac. Someone had to say it. Someone had to stand up to her. Someone had to tell the truth. Consequences be damned. She turned back. I'm glad it was me. Reynolds left. Gabbard returned to her desk, to her briefings, to the actual work of protecting America's national security. The confrontation was over. The reckoning had come. And somewhere in Chappaqua, New York, Hillary Clinton sat in her study, surrounded by the reminders of her long career. Photos with world leaders, framed awards, news clippings of her greatest triumphs, and tried to figure out how it had all gone so wrong. She picked up her phone, looked at Twitter, saw the trending hashtags. She put the phone down. Outside, the sun was setting. The long day was ending, and in the fading light, Hillary Rodham Clinton faced the one thing she'd spent her entire career avoiding: the truth about herself.